Today on the Coach of Wild podcast, we have a very special guest joining the show today. He enters his 13th season as the head coach of this institution. He's coached 30 All-Conference players, multiple All-Americans, including 4 players that have been drafted, some you may know, such as Jose Rojas and Alex Camacho. He's over 150 games over 500, with a career record of 392, 234, and 2 as he enters this season. Today, we welcome Coach Rob Pegg to the Coach of Wild podcast. With the world of coaching evolving and the carousel always changing, we're going to sit down with some coaches and we're going to figure out what they coach, how they coach, and most importantly, why they got into this profession. My name is Kason Wilkinson, and I am your host of the Coach's Why podcast.
That's a great question.
That was my Coach's Why.
What motivated you to do this?
Well, personally, it was because I started with, I just being a new coach. I started with trying to get kids out, right? Like I was sending a bunch of emails out about athletes in my town and my area, and try to help them get to the next level. And that started relationships with some wrestling coaches. And then once I started building those relationships, I was just trying to become a better coach. Like, how the heck do I get my kids to this level, right? Different questions. And so with those relationships I built, I started just asking them coaching questions. And then I was like, you know what? Like, I've always wanted to start a podcast. I've always liked to just talk and just chit chat about sports. And so then, long story short, that led to me kind of just taking the leap into, if I want to listen to coaches talk and, listening to a podcast about different coaches of different levels about different things, maybe I can reach out to, maybe get other coaches to jump on here and talk to me about kind of their stuff. And, the big motivation is these big podcasts, or even just podcasts in general, they're getting, big time guys on here, TCU coach at the time who was winning all those national championships. I can't remember his name, but I know, him in the baseball world, they had, like in football, they had, Nick Saban, blah, 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 right? Bill Self in basketball. And, I was like, damn, that's great. But that's only like 1% to 2% of the coaches in the country, if not less than that. So I was like, and so there's a bunch of other coaches who are doing this for one, out of the love, but two, they probably have just as many gems, if not more gems, to give, just because they're not on this big national screen with big PR things that they have to watch out for, whatever the case is. And so that's kind of what motivated me to do it, was like, there's such a big pool of coaches that have been doing this for X amount of years that I could get more, just as much, if not more, from with the conversation than I can from listening to a 30-minute segment with, Bill Belichick or whatever, so that's kind of why I did it and where it started from. And, so far it's been great. We've finally got to higher levels, right? Like you're my first college baseball coach, but now you're also my first, Division II head coach. We've had JUCOs, we've had D3s. I actually got a head softball coach at a D1. So it's like we're starting to see progress and interest. So, that's my motivation, is just to, and realistically, it's a never ending opportunity, right? The carousel's always going. You might be at Vanguard this year, and then 10 years from now, you could be at, a D1. So then I come back to you and say, hey coach, how's it been? Changes, right? So it's like, there's so much opportunity there, for conversations that, that's what motivates me, so yeah, that's why.
No, that's great. That's great. I appreciate that. And the rest of the so awesome, man.
Absolutely, man. So welcome back to another Coach Well podcast. We have a very special guest, our very first Division II head baseball coach, actually first baseball coach of the head coach title, to join the show. Coach Rob Pegg from Vanguard University out in California. Coach, how are you doing today?
Kason, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Of course, man. I'm super excited for this. I grew up playing baseball, so I love the game of baseball. It's one of the only sports that I did not hate any part of practice. I did not hate any part of the game. I could go play baseball and catch for hours and hours and not get tired. So I love the game. So I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about the the game and your philosophies and all that stuff. So I couldn't be more thankful, for sure.
Hey, you must have had some great coaches then, if you loved it all the time as a kid and everything. Loved practice, so you had a good background yourself.
I think it was just more the idea that I just loved the game. Like there was some hard practices. Like, don't get me wrong, when you get to high school, there was some some weight room stuff that was hard, and conditioning stuff that was hard, which I guess that was the part that I didn't like. But the actual game itself, like football, you had days where it's like we're doing pads full days a week or a few days a week, and it's like, dang, I hate this day because of this, right? Like wrestling was hard. But baseball, it's like I can go hit for hours, I can go throw for hours, I can go play the field for hours and never get tired, and so yeah, for sure, I had a really good upbringing in our area. Actually, historically, is one of the better counties in the country, or in the state, I should say, for baseball. We've produced some pretty good athletes, and like my sophomore year, I think that varsity class, that senior class, should say, every single kid went to a college program. And then, some got drafted, and, it was just cool. I came up in a really good, we host the Connie Mack World Series here. So I don't know if you ever heard of that. But yeah, you're in Vegas, so you've probably seen that or heard that. So, yeah, it's baseball is just one of those things, man. I love it. I'm a big Mets fan, so, it's tough for us, but I'm a big Mets fan. So, hopefully with Juan Soto and some of these signings, we can take a leap. Hopefully, right? That's our goal.
Great.
Yeah. But anyways, yeah, I mean, so like I said, I really appreciate you. And so we're going to definitely have a good episode. Thank you guys for listening and watching to this one. But before we get into talking a little bit about like the coaching stuff, I always like to start with talking a little bit about who you are. So I guess kind of let myself and everybody else know, which we obviously know Coach Pegg, but where you grew up, and then when you got involved in the sports, but I guess maybe in particular the sport of baseball, since that is, obviously what you're coaching now.
Yeah, no, for sure. I grew up in a sports family. My dad was a coach. He was actually a high school history teacher, but he used to say, I teach to support my coaching habit. He coached basketball, baseball, hockey. So I grew up in a really small town in about an hour and a half north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. A town of about 600 people. Yeah, real small town. The baseball season was short. I have an older brother. And I guess when my dad moved to that town, teachers have a little bit of time in the summer. He thought, man, I got two young boys. What are we going to do? And he asked my older brother, he said, well, would you rather play soccer or baseball? And thankfully, he said baseball. And so my dad kind of developed a little league up there, had some people, and started small. And that's what we did. That's what we were passionate about growing up. But I credit my father for starting that program, giving the kids in the area the opportunity. He was involved at kind of the state provincial level. And so I was always around it and had some phenomenal experiences as a kid. Probably when I was in the fourth grade, I had the opportunity. I went to Michigan State's baseball camp. And as a youngster going to that camp, that's when I really thought, man, this is cool. I love this game. I want to do this in college. Got to stay in the dorms, got to see everything about that. So I really had this fire that I was like, man, I really like baseball. And so then when college happened, I ended up going to Arizona, actually, and walking on at Scottsdale Community College. Coach Larry Smith, Ed Yeager were the coaches at the time. And like I said, being from a real small town in Ontario, I didn't know what I was getting into. I had really no idea what that was about there. And walked on, spent a couple of years there. Then from there, I actually was able to get a chance and moved over to Southern California College is where I played. And then Southern California College is actually Vanguard University now, so same school that I played at my last couple of years. Got a chance to go played some pro ball in the Frontier League after I graduated, played with the Canton Crocodiles. Great opportunity there, and then where I played, I was pursuing teaching as well. I've realized at one point, okay, it looks like the Mets or the Yankees, they're not going to sign me, and I wasn't going to replace Jorge Posada anytime soon. So I thought I better get into the coaching ranks and just want to be around the game. And my head coach that recruited me and I played for, he took me on staff, and that kind of started the coaching journey. But yeah, it's crazy to think a kid grew up in a town of 500 in Northern Ontario, ends up coaching down in Costa Mesa, Anaheim, Southern California.
Yeah. You went as far southwest as you could down there. That's crazy. Okay. And so I know you said that you you grew up in Toronto in that area, and I know that it's a small town, but what are some things that you actually, let's start with this. Like the game of baseball in Canada, right? Like I know historically there hasn't been a huge presence of baseball in Canada, right? At least not on the level of professional and or with America. Now I know this last, I think it was WBC back in, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, back whenever our closer decided to tear his Achilles, right, or ACL. I can't remember what he tore, but Canada was talked about heavily about. Now they're starting to see some progress in the world of baseball. So I know you're not necessarily connected directly towards Canada, but that's still kind of where you grew up. So how do you feel about the game of baseball and where it is, where it started, but also kind of maybe over the last few years, and then maybe where do you see it in the next 5 to 10 years when it comes to Canadian baseball?
Yeah, I think when I went through, the era that I was growing up in, the outlets to play in the States and everything the opportunities were fewer. So I was sort of in that phase where not that many guys did that. Now, though, it's really changed. That was a while ago now that I did that. The bigger cities and that, they've really got strong programs around Toronto, British Columbia, all across. There's a lot of hunger to play the game of baseball. They don't have the seasons. Obviously, that's the weather constraints. Down here in Southern California, kids are playing 12 months a year. Up there, they're playing, outside maybe 5 months a year. So that's a little bit different, but not a whole lot different, than the states like Minnesota or Michigan and things like that. So they're dealing with that. But there's a lot of good baseball people in Canada. The kids love it. The kids love the opportunities to come down to the States and play. I get a lot of emails actually from kids trying to, come down and see what the opportunities will look like to play at Vanguard and that type of thing. And so there's, it's funny you mentioned the World Baseball Classic, and Freddie Freeman of the Dodgers. His mother grew up in Canada. She passed away. That's why he played with the Canadian team. So that's why he played with the Canadian team to honor his mother that she passed away younger.
I actually didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and actually Freddie's brother, his older brother Andrew, played for us at Vanguard back in early 2000s. Oh wow! So yeah, so that's Freddie's cool. Kind of he never went to college, but if he has to claim a college, he claims Vanguard because his brother went there.
Yeah. That's cool. You got to put that on your resume. That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Freeman family's a lot closer than you think. That's awesome, man. Yeah, I think that the game of baseball, right, like is obviously a beautiful game, but the idea that it's growing up there over the last few years only is going to mean more opportunity for those guys. And which I guess, right, like Toronto Blue Jays has always been, like, they've been there. So I guess that probably helps drastically. But, I think that as the country kind of evolves with the sport, it's only going to help with the sport itself, right? So that's awesome.
That's it. You mentioned the Blue Jays. The unique thing about that is that it's like the country's team. There used to be the Montreal Expos, who are now the Washington Nationals. But Toronto is like the whole country's team, which is crazy. Although when you go out to BC, there's a lot of Mariners fans out there too.
Oh, but yeah.
It's a unique following across. It always makes headlines across the entire country. They all follow the Blue Jays. So it's been a long time since 1992 and 93, probably before you were born, but I don't. Or
just before, yeah. 95 here, so yeah, just before, yep.
Yeah,
I forgot about the Montreal
World Series. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was. But hey, the Mets haven't won since like '85, so I mean, at least there's something that Canada's got over my team, so that's good. But I can say, yeah, I forgot about the Expos. Yeah, they were. I love their. I actually really enjoyed their logo, but I also, maybe I'm just biased because I think the, mid '90s to early 2000s logos are always better. Not only for like even just looking at the World Series like logo like that they produce every year, right? I think the last really good one that I enjoyed was like '06 or '07. Now they feel like they're kind of similar. They just have more character to them. So, those things were, I don't know. I like unique stuff. I don't like, even like cars nowadays, right? Like SUVs all look the same. Back in the early 2000s, 90s, they had character, so that's just me. But 100%, I definitely, don't get me wrong. Vlad is great up there, and
Oh
Vlad
yeah.
Vlad Jr. And some of those guys. So Gosman, you guys had for a while. He might still be on that team. I don't know if yeah, he still is. I think Kevin Gosman, right, the pitcher. Yeah, you guys had yeah.
Yeah, and Gossman's a Colorado guy. I actually saw him pitch in high school when I was coaching in Colorado. So
Really? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Heck yeah. So I'm definitely going to get into kind of your timeline because I know you've kind of been throughout the country, not only as a player, right, from Canada to Cali, but I know we talked about you coaching in New Mexico and Colorado. So we're definitely going to talk a little bit about that. But prior to that, I want to ask you this is I personally love whenever we talk a little bit about coaches who made an impact, right? Because I think that as a coach, that's kind of our goal is to be an impact regardless of what it is, right? So was there ever a coach or coaches, can be plural, who made an impact on you, and who were they and why?
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, pretty well every coach I had made an impact of some sort on me. Like I said, going back, my first coach in baseball specifically was my dad. So he was the biggest impact on me as a coach. But then the other community coaches that I had, and then my first college coach, Larry Smith at Scottsdale, he good knowledgeable man of baseball, but really like a tough competitor. I always joke that he went to the Bobby Knight School of Coaching because he actually coached at Indiana for a while. So you
Okay.
came to practice
Yeah,
prepared. You did not take a day off, or you heard about it. So
yeah.
he did
Throw
that.
some chairs at you if you don't mess up. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, not quite the chairs, but maybe some. But yeah, he was about a good-hearted man and gave me the opportunity. And then probably college-wise, the biggest impact guy was Kevin Casper, who was my head coach in college. He went there. He played in the San Francisco Giants organization, and he was able to combine. So Vanguard, it's a Christian university, so the faith aspect's really good and strong. And Coach Casper was the first kind of coach that integrated kind of the faith into his coaching style of doing that, at the college level. So that was very impactful. All those preparations, and then the year I played professional baseball, a guy by the name of Mike Burton, and then our pitching coach Mike Arner were both influential coaches that I had there. As well as probably the most important guy in my career was the volunteer coach Doug Yeager.
Okay.
Yeah, he helped launch my coaching career, and I didn't know it at the time, but a great man too.
So Coach Yeager kind of got you into the coaching world, which I will ask you about in just one moment. But you mentioned something about how you got faith implemented into your life as well. I guess really into a program as an athlete. So I guess my question for you is what is something that you took from? It's kind of a two-parter here. What is one thing that you took from like the mental side of things from all your coaches that you feel like are so happy that you got to experience that you've implemented into your program? And then the second part of that is kind of the same question is what is something maybe schematic wise, whether it's game management or practice or whatever the case is that you feel like you've taken from these coaches that you got to implement into your program now as well. So yeah, I guess kind of the two-parter there is maybe on the mental side and the schematics or the game side of things that you feel like you've taken to implement into your program now.
Yeah, Well, going like I said, I think the idea that your identity can't be wrapped up in the sport alone gives you a freedom to play. We live in a day where, right, everything's got a scoreboard and there's a measurement to everything and there's the pressure to perform. And that pressure is there, obviously. I tell guys, it's like, well, you can't go for 50 and still expect to be in the lineup type thing. That's just sort of the reality of the competition. But as a human, you got to develop your gifts. You got to be able to play in freedom. And that's when you're going to be at your max potential, when you're not worried about the external things that you can't control. And there's trying to find a balance there. And I think that stems a lot comes through your identity, how you feel you're justified as a person. And so that, to me, people that can understand that dynamic, they're able to play freer, live freer as well. And that's an important concept. It doesn't take away from the competitive edge because you still want to work really hard. You want to do the right things and be prepared for the moments that you have. But At the end of the day, we always say the umpire, the announcer, they always say play baseball, man. It's still a game, and even the higher ranks, obviously the pro guys have all this pressure on them to perform and contracts, and people say, well, they're making all this money and blah 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 blah, and you're like, yeah, they are probably more than more than they deserve.
Probably, yeah,
being a baseball player, but yeah, some of those contracts are ridiculous when they break it down. They're like, oh, he's making like $20,000 every hit he gets or something. And you're like, okay, but good for them. Good for them. They rose up the ranks. And mental, the mental side, the peace, the calm, there has to be that calm in you as a baseball player. They always talk about the confidence you have to have and that. And everybody has a different sort of what I would say a hype level. You get those guys. A speaker one time used the example of the Boston Celtics, and he was saying back when I think it was around 2010, and they had Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen, and he would say, Kevin Garnett would be a guy, he'd be bouncing off the walls before the game. So he was like 10 on the hype level, and if he was bouncing around and going crazy, he was going to play great. He said, but Ray Allen, you weren't sure he was even conscious, man. He's over there just heart barely beating. But he'd go out and just knock down all the shots in that moment, and the hype level. But those baseball, you still get different personalities, but it's more of those guys that it can just relax and just play the game and not get rattled by the different things.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, right? Is like in baseball, you have these, and I always kind of mention this, right? You bat 300 in the pros, right? You're going to be a Hall of Famer. So you have to understand. And I'm not a baseball coach, but I didn't play college baseball. But the idea is like baseball is, and specifically the baseball season is so long that slumps are going to be destined to happen, right? So like understanding that you can't get too high or too low when you're batting or hitting or pitching really well, but then also not getting too low whenever it's the opposite, right? Oh, I'm in a slump, or I've gotten one hit in 20 at bats, or I just gave up 4 runs in the last 3 innings pitched, or whatever the case is, right? Understanding you can't get too high or too low, which I think is in any sport, as we've kind of hinted at, and what I've said in the past. But you have to be level-headed no matter where you are. Same approach, right? No matter who it is, what if you're on the pitching staff or if you're a hitter. So yeah, I agree. I think baseball is such a mental game that you have to learn how to do that for yourself if you want to be successful really at any level.
Yeah. Well, actually, too, what's unique about baseball is it's the one sport where you can do almost everything right and fail, and then only do about 10% right and also succeed. And what I mentioned by that is you can be a hitter. The guy throws you an 85-mile-an-hour slider on the black. You rope it to the right center gap. You crush it, but the center fielder lays out, makes a great catch. Well, you're out. You're going back to the dugout. And technically, that's an 0 for 1. But you executed. That was a phenomenal at that. Whereas you could get jammed, hit the ball 3 inches above your fingers, trickles down third base, and next thing you know, you're standing on first. And you're 1 for 1.
Exactly. 6 foot, it's a single. Yeah.
It's really the only sport I believe that's like that, where the outcomes in that are different. It's like basketball, man, you can't like shoot an air ball. And, well, you might get lucky once in a while and it deflects or whatever in, but you know what I'm saying? So baseball is really unique that way.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I think that it's funny that you say that though, because like, I guess exactly perfect thing is, when people are like, especially as a fan who just is a fan of baseball, but has maybe never played it or doesn't understand these things. It's like this guy could be truly like he goes 0 for 4 in a game, but as you said, he's hit every ball hard, right? He was on time. He's been this, whatever, which obviously doesn't help, which I think the game, back, I guess before last year, the year before that, like the shift, right? Like this guy's a pull guy. He's a whatever, right? Like you could hit this ball hard to the left side or the right side, but you have all these people in front of it. But it's like you did everything right, every approach to the at bat correctly. So, like just keep that same approach every time, even if you go 0 for 4 or you don't have 2 or 3 games in a series that you don't hit well, and I think that also comes to, which I would assume a coach has to keep that person understanding that they did the correct approach at that time, right? They can't, that kid could be upset or whatever because they, why did, I hit that ball so damn hard and it just didn't work out for me. But as a coach, you have to, I would assume, have to kind of keep that kid or adult, I guess, in the pros, level-headed. Like, dude, don't change anything. It's going to start falling for you.
Yeah.
They can't be there every time. You just have to keep that same, don't change anything. Just keep going.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head right there. Yeah, that's all about the game. And that's why when we look at, people will use that saying a lot. They'll be like, oh, you succeed 3 out of 10 times and you're a Hall of Famer or whatever. I always say, I don't necessarily agree with that comment, because I was like, it depends on what those other 7 look like. It's like, were those 7 punch outs, or were those 7, 5 of 7 hard hit balls that would have fallen in? And usually, so it's like I said, understanding what success is in the game, and understanding, like you said, it's 9 against 1. 9 guys trying to get you out. You're the only guy trying to get on.
And I like that you said that, though, because, like, for example, like Aaron Judge, right, is obviously a power hitter. So, but he strikes out a lot, which I guess even last year he's always kind of struck out a lot. But he's still one of the quote unquote, which he is, right, one of the most dangerous hitters in the game. But he can go, 3 for 10. But those 3 hits, he might have 2 home runs and a double.
Yeah,
and they're all RBIs, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, but he struck out 6 of those other 7, and then that one other time's just a dink line drive or whatever, right? So it's like, in that situation, right? And I always like to mention, like, one of my favorite hitters was Tony Gwynn. He was one of the best hitters to ever go, right, in my opinion, who probably is underrated in a lot of people's eyes. People don't – I don't think I've ever had a conversation about Tony Gwynn, but he's iconic at the plate. But same thing, right? He batted over 300 for his career. But, what do those other 7 look like? And I guess that's kind of the hard part, is, like, what distinguishes a successful other 7? Because, like, in Aaron Judge's world, he can strike out 5 of those other 7 and then only give, and then just in general get out 7 times, but he's still considered one of the best hitters because he's hitting 3 home runs. He's hitting a home run, one for 3 or 1 for 4, whatever. He's hitting a home run every few days, and I think it just really does depend on who you are as a batter and obviously what you're doing for your team, if you're producing or not.
Production really is what
and at the end of the day, right, you're trying to score runs. So you like those guys that when they do hit it, it does go over the fence because that's a run, versus the guy, you're like, oh, this other guy's 3 for 10, but those were all singles. This guy's maybe struck out 7 times, but his 3 hits produced 3 runs. So you're going to weigh those options in there. And that's the way, honestly, Major League Baseball is starting to take a shift from that. But probably 5-6 years ago, they were all about just the home run guys. They didn't care. They were like saying, well, a strikeout's just the same as a ground out or a fly out. It doesn't matter. An out's an out. And, if you hit it over the fence, that's all we care about. But now they're starting to understand a little bit more that, hey, putting the ball in, the defenses, as you already mentioned, with the shifts gone, putting the ball in play is important, and especially at the college level. Because I'm like, hey, there's some good defenders in college, but there's guys that make mistakes. And, you put the ball in play, good things can happen. You strike out, that's not very good. Not many good things happen.
Yeah, it's that was how I was told. Just put the ball in play. It doesn't matter if you get out, but you never know what'll happen. But this is kind of the last piece of this that I was going to talk about, is like, baseball momentum is real. Even though baseball's slow, right, in relative terms to other sports, I feel like momentum is something, right? If a pitcher goes out and strikes out your 3, 4, and 5 hitter, right? Like, that's huge in his mental, to where he's confident against them again and or everybody else, because of the fact that they're not their power hitters or whatever. However your lineup is, I would assume 3, 4, 5 are traditionally like your setup, your power, right, or your cleanup, quote unquote, and then your 5 still considered
the meat of
the lineup. Yeah. Correct, yeah. So it's still momentum, even though he still has that confidence. It's just building his confidence. So every time you put the ball in play, he's like, okay, he's hitting off me, or your batter's like, hey, I can hit him, or whatever, right? So I think momentum's still a thing in baseball, even though it's slower, and you may not feel it like you feel basketball or wrestling or whatever other sport, right? But the idea is that there's still momentum, and it's more on the mental side than necessarily the action packed, if you would.
Yeah. No, it's real. It's real. There's a feel. You feel it in the dugouts, versus the dugouts. You feel kind of where the momentum's going. It's that belief. It's the confidence and stuff. So, yeah, you're right on there.
Absolutely. So I know you mentioned, Coach Eager got you into the world of coaching. So let me ask you this really quick. When did you decide that coaching is what you wanted to do, right? I know you said when the Yankees and Mets weren't going to come sign you, you're like, hey, maybe I'll get into the coaching game, right? So was it just the realization that maybe like I'm not going to go play MLB or like in that high level, that like I still want to be involved in the sport, which I think is what you said. So you can kind of just confirm that. But the other part of this question I wanted to do is, what's your timeline? So like Coach Eager got you into the game. So how did he get you? Kind of like, what opportunity did he bring to you that got you into coaching?
Well, I think I always, like I said, I grew up in a sports family, and with my dad being a coach and everything in the high school, I always that was my fallback plan. I was just kind of like, hey, I'm going to get a teaching degree, and then I'm going to coach at high school or whatever. Just have the options of it. But I figured even if it was Little League, I'm just like, I love being around the game. I love the interaction, the relationships, and it's the competition as well. So the combination of those two things, just drawn to it. And I tell any coach, you talk about the Why podcast. I said, there's some coaches that love the game, but the people get in the way. I was like, you have to love people. If you don't love people, don't coach, because you're going to end up being miserable at some point, because it's about the people, and that's the key thing. So I don't know. I always had that in me that I wanted to be a part of things. And so the timeline, actually, I mentioned Coach Yeager, but it was Coach Casper. Coach Casper, who I played for, I went back to get my master's degree at the university. And he just, a small school, not a lot of resources. I'm just like, Coach, I'm here. I'd love to help out. And he said, yeah, I'd love to have you, as a catcher for him and stuff like that. So he allowed me to get on staff with him. And then I was able to coach at the college ranks for 7 years with him as the assistant coach right after I graduated. Where Coach Yeager comes into the conversation, he was our volunteer assistant on the pro team. Well, he got involved in athletics as well, in administration roles. And he was an athletic director, I believe, at Wheaton College up in Illinois. And then he became the athletic director at Colorado Christian University, which is your old conference there in the RMAC. So he was the AD, and we always maintained a relationship. And I joked about him. I said, hey, when are you going to start baseball over there? Because he's a baseball guy at heart. And then a few years later, he does. And so I call him up. I say, hey, you're starting baseball. Man, I'd love to come out there. And so he said, well, put your name in the hat. We're going through a process to see what happens. And that was an interesting dynamic, because they just started the program. It wasn't great from a competitive standpoint. It wasn't great in terms of how it was funded or anything like that. It was just sort of like, hey, we're going to get this thing going. So I was fortunate, man. You talk about it in life, you got to have kind of direction, and God opened doors for you and things. But it was my relationship with him prior all those years that helped get me in the door and kind of start the head coaching experience at the college level. But I was the assistant coach, Coach Casper, who I played for. He allowed me to do that for 7 years. And I wasn't sure that I really wanted to do that initially. It's funny. I wasn't one of those guys that comes on and goes, I want to be the head coach of the, whatever, D1 head coach or a pro head coach. I just want to be a part of things. And as things evolve, I looked at that situation, and, the doors just opened. And I came to kind of the conclusion in life. I said the two things that really get me going, is the relational and the faith aspect, and the competition, the combining. And so being able to coach at a Christian university, at CCU and now Vanguard, those two things have just been a tremendous gift. And the people behind that obviously open up those doors for me. So eternally grateful for them.
Yeah, and I love that you talk about the faith aspect of things. And so it sounds like faith is a huge piece of not only your life and kind of where you've, as I know you mentioned it as an athlete, right, but also now as a coach. And now you're back at a same thing, right, faith-based institution. So is that something that, I guess, as a program, have you, for one, instilled it? And it sounds like, right, like that's a big piece whenever you're, I don't know if this is, how do I want to word this? Sorry, I'm trying to think how I want to word this. Yeah, it's good. So whenever it comes to recruiting, which I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but like, is that something that you really, I wouldn't say preach on, but is that something that is brought up when it comes to you recruiting these athletes, is understanding what they're going to get into and how important it is to maybe you or as a program? And then the second part of that is, have you seen, or do you feel like having that faith-based, maybe foundation as a program, have you seen anything maybe when it comes to like young athletes and maybe their own change from being a freshman to a senior by instilling that from a young age? Does that make sense?
Okay. No, that's a great, and really the answer to everything you've mentioned there is absolutely, and we look at it as a program. The schools sort of have expectations of the people that you have come into the program. So as I'm recruiting a kid, obviously, we look for good players first. We're just like, hey, he's got to be able to play. But then a lot of the conversation I'll have with a kid is I just ask him point blank. I say, hey, what's your faith background? Tell me. I always ask kid, tell me about you. Like, did you grow up going to church? What are your beliefs in that thing? And we get guys all across the spectrum. And so it's nice that the school allows us to have students come in that are willing to grow, because maybe they didn't grow up in a family where their mom and dad took them to church on Sundays. I did. That's how I was raised, and I'm extremely thankful for that. But I want to give these guys the opportunity, because it's nothing. I tell them it's nothing weird. We're not doing weird voodoo type stuff, man. It's like, hey, you're coming. You'll learn about the Bible. You're learn about who Jesus is and all this, and you're just going to grow in faith and your spirituality. And so we present it. We're straightforward about it. We want to know what a kid's coming in. Ask him what's a good time for him. If he's saying good time for him is Saturday night, he's going to, hey, I like to club it up and find some good girls and all this stuff. I'm like, you're probably not the best fit for our program right away. Get
Absolutely,
that figured out.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we're still dealing with 18 to 23-year-old adolescent males, so they're
in California, SoCal,
Yeah, SoCal, there's a lot to do. So by no means are guys perfect, but it's part of the process. So I really enjoy the schools I've had and the coaching staff and the support system. The people really understand the nature of it. It's not too pharisaical, there's a little bit of grace, which we all need. But there's obviously the truth, and get guys growing. And so, yeah, I have guys in the program all across the spectrum. Some have grown up in the church like that. Others, honestly, a few is like, Coach, man, I've been to church maybe a few times, but I really don't know anything about this. And I said, okay, that's great, man. But here's what we're about. If you want to be a part of this, if you want to grow, we'd love to have you. And a lot of those times, those guys say yes. And man, I've never had in my time there a kid come through and say, oh, this part was terrible. Like, every kid I've ever had is just like thankful they've grown, just see the world in a different perspective. So, that's really what the school is about in the big picture, because we want these guys. Obviously, everybody's trying to win on the field in the games, but we talk about the game of life. It's like, man, you got to win in the game of life. As I said, you lose a baseball game, you strike out, that's going to happen. There'll be another game, there'll be an opportunity, but you live once. You live one time, and you got to win that game. You got to win that game. Go through.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that, yeah, and instilling that, right? Some of these kids, right? Like I don't know. I think it's a great thing to have when it comes to programs, and I know every program's different, every coach is different, but I think that as you develop, and to be honest with you, I've mentioned this in a few episodes prior to this one, is I'm relatively new to the church and the level of like consistency, right? I've been going for about 8 months consistent now, and so I've seen a lot of opportunities come just from that change, right? And a lot of it's within myself. But I think that if you're doing that to young men, right, and like you mentioned, some of them have never been in church before, right, and they're open-minded and they're open to just experiencing it and or learning about it, right? Like, even if nothing technically happens, right, like, you're not just going to go from, nothing and then automatically going to church and now you're an MVP and now you're, all conference and stuff. But the idea is like, you might change as a person to be able to handle different situations differently, right? You maybe worry a little bit less, whatever the case is. So I think that that's a great tool / great, habit. Obviously, there's so many different words you can put into it, but
Yeah.
that these kids are going to be able to experience.
And what's exciting about that I discovered in the coaching world is that the college baseball, probably the baseball world as a whole, there's a lot of great men of faith in the game that I've learned from, and some are more outspoken than others, but all across the levels, not just at the Christian universities. Nick Minajoni, Kentucky, he's sharing his faith on the national scene. You follow those guys at all? A lot of different other programs out there. Guys that shaped me, Jerry Kindall, when you go to the stories of what shaped coaches, coming out of high school, I didn't know anything about the U.S. process, but what I did know was the University of Arizona was really good at baseball, and Jerry Kindall was their head coach, and he was a man of faith that I saw through a Fellowship of Christian Athletes magazine, and so that was my first contact. But going back, I had no business. I wasn't going to play at the University of Arizona. I wasn't that good initially, but I didn't know that at the time. But his response, and he's actually, his organization was one of the ones that said, hey, you should look at maybe going the junior college route. And I said, I didn't know what a junior college was. I'm sharing that story with my mom. You'll laugh at this probably, but my mom says, like, junior college? Well, that sounds like a college for idiots. And I'm like, well, not quite this.
Not quite idiots.
JUCO, there's a whole spectrum there about that. So I don't. That was just a funny comment my mom made at the time.
Yeah, that's funny. That's hilarious.
But just the whole faith aspect. I just wanted to, because going to the conventions that we go to and seeing different coaches, all different levels, and that's what I said. Going back to coaching as a whole. I think the reason you get a lot of men of faith is because, that's one of the, people that have a good relationship with the Lord, they care about people and they're invested in them. And as a coach, that's what you want to do. It's like, everybody wants to win. And that's just part of where I kind of, I think our culture's gone the wrong way a little bit. There's so much emphasis on winning and the dollar signs, that we've missed the other part of it. It's just like, I put it this way. I've made the comment to the coaches at our university. I said, I think parents right now, they're more concerned that their kid is a good athlete rather than a good person, right? And they got it switched around. It's like,
absolutely.
Hey, let's make sure we're raising good kids that they're going to benefit society and the community and walk out things. And if they happen to be a great athlete as well, phenomenal. But let's not just push them. Hey, you got to be a good athlete so you can get signed by the Yankees and make $80 gazillion, and all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it doesn't help whenever you see these big contracts, right? And that there's no salary cap in baseball, so there's so much money that's literally being thrown around that there's so much emphasis on becoming a good, specifically in baseball, which I guess the same in basketball, or I guess really any pro league in the top, the big four. Yeah. That it's such a money-driven sport, and it kind of is a good conversation starter, I think, for which I do want to talk about recruiting, but about the money side of things is like travel ball, right? Like travel ball in the world of baseball is such a big thing, and I know back when I played, right, we had travel ball. Like I went to Steamboat Springs, which is a World Series at that time, right? Like I went to that when I was younger, right? You have these Connie Mack World Series, you have all these different things across the country on tournament travel ball. And then over the last probably decade or so, you've started really seeing like PG, right? You really started seeing some of these showcases kind of pop up. Specifically, I would say the last 5 or 6, but I think really the last 10 years, these showcases are really where people are going to try to get seen. And so I think it's similar, like in soccer, it's a pay-to-play type of thing. I don't think necessarily baseball is a pay-to-play, but I really think that if you want to be seen, and I want you to, this is my opinion, right? I'll let you kind of take the floor on it in a minute, but
good perspective.
But I think that when it comes to like the game of baseball, there's so much money being thrown into these showcases that, and I guess individual coaches and all these things that people are spending so much money on, that it, and this might be a two-parter, is for one, as a high school coach, right? And I don't know necessarily because I haven't talked to a lot of head high school baseball coaches, but I feel like, I say this because there's some things in other sports that I've talked to about this, as well as myself in club wrestling, but that sometimes there's like this contingency or maybe this roadblock where it's like, well, my club coach and my individual coaches are telling me this, but my high school coach is telling me this, and it's like I don't know which one to listen to, right? Because like I'm in high school season right now, and so am I listening to what this coach says or what this coach says? And then obviously after season, you go directly to your club or whatever, and that changes up a few things as well. So it's like I don't know. I guess it's a big conversation, I feel like, in the world of baseball, but I guess like it's just one of those things where people spend so much time and effort into trying to be seen at these showcases that I feel like it's taking away from, I guess, the beauty of like youth baseball, or like, you know, growing up in the youth baseball side, which then obviously as a college coach, right? Like, I don't know how you feel about it, because you probably do go to some showcases because that's where a lot of the best athletes are going. So you're kind of, I wouldn't say you're forced to do it, but you probably are incentivized to do it because of the fact that like I can go to this one showcase and see, you know, specifically in SoCal, I might see 300 top athletes in Southern California and maybe Arizona, versus I don't have to go watch game film all the time. So I don't know. I guess that's kind of an argument that's there, but I don't know. How do you feel about travel baseball and kind of where it is with all of that?
Yeah, I think you got it. Your perspective's pretty spot on, honestly. It's like anything. There's some good and then there's some negatives to it. It's definitely growing. It's gotten sort of watered down, in my opinion. You know, it is a little bit of pay to play type thing, you know, because of the club coaches, and no knock on them. They're just doing their jobs, but they get players, they get more teams. They're going to get funding and stuff like that. So they go around. The hard part is that kids think, oh, I'm playing travel ball, so I should be able to play in college. And then it's just like, hey, man, no, not necessarily. Like, college baseball is really hard to play at. I think it's only 8% or something of guys that play in high school even make, you know, 4-year college rosters. So the competition level gets ramped up. It is, you know, the nature of sports is kind of, they lose a little bit of that community feel. Like you said, the beauty of youth baseball and those, I wish there was a little bit more of that. The high schools, I think for the most part, still do a pretty good job. And like I said, there's a lot of club teams that do a very good job and create that. But you talked about the conflict kind of coaching styles and who to listen to. And it is crazy. We get guys at the college that was like, well, I have my pitching coach and this guy, and this is my strength guy, and this is my training guy, you know, and it's like, well, that's good. And I think you can't, as a college coach, you can't fight that and just be like, oh, I'll throw that all away. As I always say, any athlete, you're going to gain something from every coach, and you put it together to be in the best form of who you are. So we don't try to think, and no coach knows everything. Like, you know, and if there's a coach that says they do, then they're like, well, that guy's probably done coaching. You know, the legendary John Wooden, right? Probably the coach's coach in basketball. People that know him, you know, he's the day you stop trying to learn is the day you're done, you know, and that was his perspective. And a lot of people have that. So we encourage guys, at least in our own programs, to be like, okay, well, you learned some things from this coach. Okay. We're not going to tell you to dismiss that if that helps you. We're going to try to build on that. We may have a little bit different vantage point or a different perspective, so things for you to try. But we hope in the combination, our goal is to get you to be the best player that you can become, however you got there. You know, and there's a lot, it's like you said, a lot of coaches have shaped that journey. But yeah, it's a big animal, the club ball and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, it's you got to pick and choose anymore, because you can go to some club games and it's just like, there's not that many great. They're like, okay. Right. But it's exposure. I don't knock the families, because that's the path. It's like, well, I want to keep playing. And in the summers, if I'm not playing with my high school, who do I have the option to play for? Try to get a club team. And it's like, well, this team's stacked. These guys are all D1 commits. They got draft picks on this team. I'm going to go over here. They're not as good, but at least I'm playing. And
that's fair.
At the end of the day, that's what it is. It's fun to play. It's fun to play. Yeah. Get an opportunity to keep playing.
Yeah.
And that's how it goes.
I think it's interesting because you talk about like, and you talk about like earlier, you mentioned your mom mentioned and you yourself, right? You walked onto the JUCO and the JUCO route. And I think baseball and softball, maybe even football, basketball, right? Like some of these sports, but specifically baseball and softball, right? JUCO, maybe not even softball as much, but baseball in particular, JUCO's not even necessarily frowned upon anymore, because there are so many people who have taken that route from, you know, for example, right? Like Bryce Harper, JUCO to where he's at today, right? So it's not even necessarily a big thing anymore for kids to not go JUCO. So I guess it's a two-parter again for you. Is one, knowing that, especially with the change, right, with JUCO being that they have 2 years and then they get true 4-year opportunity in college. How are you going to approach that, maybe yourself or maybe as a staff, and how do you feel like that helps baseball? And then number two is, because what makes JUCO route in baseball, and I'm not trying to deter, right? Because kids will maybe want to go to most kids want to go 4-year right out of school, right? I would assume out of high school, but if they're not getting the looks they're looking for, they'll go JUCO so they get opportunity later. So like, what makes that route so appealing for kids who maybe aren't getting the offers that they are hoping for right out of high school?
Yeah, I just think it's development. It's hard. Like, I always tell a kid coming out of high school, he's 18 years old. I said, well, you're going to be a better player when you're 18 or when you're 22? The guy's like, well, 22. Right. I said, well, that's who you're competing with. You come out of high school, with the transfer portal and kids being able to bounce back different levels and everything. It's really tough as a freshman. Unless you're a really blue chip plus player, you're going to come in and probably sit or whatever. It's going to be tough for you to get on the field. So I think JUCOs do a really good job of development. Get a little bit more opportunity early and get in there. And then the other thing for me is I like a kid that's come from a JUCO because, one, it tells me he loves baseball, because no kid survives the junior college circuit without loving the game. It weeds people out. And I think the kids are a little bit tougher maybe that come through that route because they've seen it. They have a little bit more edge to them.
It's more grindy. They had to grind.
Come out of soft. Sometimes the kids are a little soft that come out of high school. They're a little soft emotionally. Maybe the money, they've had a comfortable. It's like, oh, my dad, I played in this club team and blah, blah, and it didn't matter. And it's like, well, that we don't care about that. We don't care how you get to our school at this point. We don't care who your dad is or anything like that. You got to get it done. Yeah. So there's aspects like that to it. Yeah. And it's just opportunity. And I look in the state of California, there's about 90 schools that have a junior college baseball program. That's just California, and
opportunities there.
An optional and very good coaches, and there's relationships and they can go back. But there's no way, for me, and I wasn't ready for a 4-year out of high school to compete at. It's just like I said, 22-year-olds competing against 18-year-olds. It's just night and day.
Yeah, it's hard.
I think that's important, though, as a high school coach, too, doing your due diligence to talk about opportunities, right? Because I feel like JUCO's, and you sounded like you were open-minded whenever you were in school. But like this whole D1 or bust type of thing, I think it's going away a little bit, and baseball might be that way because JUCO is such a big thing. But I think that doing your due diligence as a high school coach to educate kids on like, hey, opportunities don't always come knocking, especially nowadays with the transfer portal and all these things. You almost have to kind of, the first few offers you take or look at, you almost have to really consider, right? So it's really educating them to understand like, hey, if you go here, there's a shot to, and obviously also talking to the college coach too, right? Doing the due diligence of the conversations, but ideally educating the kids on like, hey, this is this opportunity here. This is where you may sit. This is where we might get to in a 2, 3, 4-year span versus if you go this route, right? You might sit this opportunity, blah, 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 right down the line. So it's just educating these kids to understand, where they sit coming out of high school, and then realistically what's going to be the best opportunity for them to obviously reach their goals and their dreams, because that's our goal, is at least my goal as a coach is to help kids get to that next level, right? But I also want them to be able to go and either compete right away or at least put themselves in a position to be, have that self inclusion, right? I don't want them to go sit for 3-4 years before they see the field or whatever, right? I guess in my case, the mat, versus they can go here and compete year 1 or year 2, and then go, pretty much essentially compete 4 or 5 years consistently versus only 1 or 2 at a 4-year school. So I think a lot of it just comes to education from the high school coach and doing my due diligence, but also having those conversations with the college coaches, like what's your roster look like? Where do you see me? What type of, where do you see myself as well as the program in X amount of years, or whatever the conversations might be, I think is important.
Those are very important to do that. And yeah, it goes back. It's hard, right? Because, the players move around at the college levels. There's no, I guess, loyalty is less of a thing these days. So you, as a college coach, you don't really know who your roster is until day one of school in that fall, because there's guys that can leave ahead of time. And so it's hard to have a 4-year vision for a kid anymore, which is a little bit difficult, because when we recruit guys, we want to look at that. I typically, when I look at kids out of high school, I want to know where I think he's at in 2 years. If I don't think he can be in the, beyond the field in some capacity in 2 years, then I'll let him know that, be like, hey, you got 2 options. You should either look at, if you really want to make a baseball decision, you should look at a junior college or a different thing, maybe then come back your senior. Or we get guys, though, that just love the school. They want to be at Vanguard. They're like, Coach, this is where I want to go to school. I love baseball. I'm willing to grind for a few years. And if I don't see the field till upperclassmen or whatever, I'll do that. And we've had guys do that. And some of my most memorable guys in the program have been guys like that just,
Absolutely.
Hey, I'm here. And I know that, I'm not going to be a starter, but I'm going to be there. I'm going to grind, and I'll get some opportunities here and there. But I love being a Vanguard. So I love those kids.
Absolutely. So talking about where you're finding kids, this would be my last recruiting question for you. Where do you look for your kids? So, like, where are you looking, right? I know we talked about showcases. We talked about club ball. I feel like you're in a really great area to probably find really good talent. But, like, are you looking kind of locally / regionally? Are you looking at maybe states that you've been in, right? You've spent time in New Mexico. You spent time in Colorado, right? And as well as you played at Arizona. So you're kind of looking into those states. Or are you looking nationwide? Are you looking for kids that have the talent to come to you? I mean, kind of like, where are you looking for your kids? And then I know you've already kind of touched on what kind of kid you're looking for, but is there anything that stands out in a kid that is important to you, that whenever you're actually trying to sign this kid up?
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, we are blessed in the baseball hotbed in Southern California. There's so many great players. There's so many great schools down here in the region as well. But there's a ton of players, ton of population. So we don't really care where we get a kid from. They can be all over the East Coast, but we don't spend a lot of time traveling or working out there. It's more, any kid we get from kind of an outlier, other part of the country, is usually just a contact or relationship. Somebody knew them and said, hey, they want to come to California. Look at this kid. What do you think? And so, we spend most of our time really locally, regionally, the Southwest and the West Coast. We get a lot of kids from Washington State and that area. They like to get out of the rain, come down and play baseball in the sunshine in the spring.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a draw. And it just has to do. We kind of have a saying in our program: the farther away a kid is from home, the better he better be. We don't need to go to Michigan and get a kid that we could find at the high school next door. But like I said, we're kind of a niche school, so we're open to kids that way. But you look at our rosters, and the majority of the guys are going to be kind of regional guys for sure, local regional guys. And then just in terms of the qualities, and I think, we're not too probably different than most coaches at the college level. We want guys that can play and have the skill level. And then the character and the fit and the teammate, just the type of human being he is extremely important. Because I've been doing this long enough. And it's not fun to have a team. He can be talented, but if he's a knucklehead, man, it just takes the joy out of what you're doing. You want guys to buy into the program. Good kids, going to grow, going to do things the right way. So those are the things that are the most important to us.
Important to you, absolutely.
Yeah. Character and what they're going to be able to be, and if they're willing to be a good person, right? For not only as they develop as a kid, as a person, but also for you and your staff and a good teammate. So I agree. I think that's a big piece of it. And yeah, you're right. It is pretty common to we want character. We want somebody who's going to be a good person. So I think that's a pretty well-rounded answer for sure. So now that you've answered all my recruiting questions, I appreciate you diving into that. I kind of want to dive into the back half of these questions, right, to talk a little bit about the philosophy. So my first question I have for you, and if you guys don't know, Coach Pegg has had a really good, illustrious career, if you would. He's been really successful at Vanguard. I believe your record, which I know you probably don't care, but your statisticians do, I guess. He's got he's over 100 he's 100 wins over 500 as a career at Vanguard. So very successful there. So I'm interested to see, and you already mentioned like loyalty, right? Like that's hard to build in college now. So how do you build a successful program, or I should say, how do you build a successful culture on the level of buy-in and mindset?
Yeah. Well, we have our core principles, and again, it all comes back to recruiting and the guys you get on the team. If you get, and it's just, sports model is no different than a business model or anything else you want. You get good people, you're going to have a good culture. You get bad people, you're going to have a bad culture. And once in a while you take a chance on a kid that you think you could shape them a little bit and put them in the right environment around guys. And you always have to analyze that. And that's an ongoing thing. And that's the hard part. Because you love kids, and then you might have them for 1 year, you might have them for 2 years, and then they're gone. Like this year, one of my favorite guys already, man, he's a 1-year grad transfer. I love the kid to death, and he's great for the culture. He's come in, he fits our ideals. He's a leader, but now he's going to be gone next year. And so you're always looking at who you're losing, who you might gain. You got to do your research on stuff like that to keep that. And if you get guys that love the game, they care about their teammates, they want to be competitive, and they want to do the right thing off the field, that's sort of just the expectations. We don't have a ton of team rules. Like the guys don't show up and they get like a big handbook of here's all your rules. Don't do this, don't do that. There's just more standards and expectations that we have of guys. And then the returners, if they do that, they see the new guys come in and they're like, oh, this guy's been in the program, and okay, he does it. He goes to all his classes, he does things, he competes, and sets that up. And so it's not by any stretch, it's not a perfect science. It's honestly, and it's part of the fun, part of the challenge is every year is its own year. We're not dealing with robots. It's not the assembly line. You just punch them in and, everybody looks the exact same when they come out. It's like, okay, we got to work a little bit more with this guy. This guy's good. This guy's easy to transition in. And then that's where the coaching staff and the environment of the school comes in. Is you identify those guys that you need, and not everybody works out. That's the end of the day. We've had some guys where it's just like, oh man, we made a mistake on this guy, or he's just not buying in, and so he finds a new. My old AD, the guy that hired me, Bob Wilson, another when you talk about influential coach, got to make sure I mention his name. He's a legend as well in the NAI and Vanguard. But he always had a saying, "Hey man, you train them or you trade them." He said that was his train them or trade them.
That's crazy, but I like it.
yeah. And no, but it's true, right? You shape them. Yeah. You shape them. See, that's the difference with parenting. I have 4 kids. The problem with parenting, you can't trade them.
You can't trade them.
I'd like to trade you, but I can't.
Yeah, we have a phone call if we do that. Yeah.
Yeah. We get in trouble. But college, man, you got that option. So we don't want that, But sometimes that's just what you have to do. Is sometimes you just realize, hey, this guy's not fitting in. He's not going to carry on our ideals. And so we're better off cutting ties and giving him a fresh opportunity somewhere else. And sometimes kids do that on their own. But I don't know. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. I don't claim to have any. I've been blessed, man. I've just been, you win. Coaches have always said, you want to be a good coach, get good players. That's the end of it. You try to form them, you treat them, but nobody wins without good players. I've got some wins in the coaching standpoint, but I've yet to get a hit. I've yet to strike anybody out as a coach. I write the lineup, try to encourage the guys, build them up. Our coaching staff's always working hard to develop the guys, keep it going, keep challenging them.
That's a big thing, though, is the development side, right? Like, you have to develop kids, and I think as a college coach, right, like, you hope that these kids have had a pretty good foundation from high school or youth, but development is still a huge thing, really, no matter where you are, right? And we talked about, you mentioned earlier, like Coach Wooden, and if you feel like you know everything, you should probably back away from coaching. But, like, even as a coach, we have to develop, right? And you've been in it a while to know the game, and really coaching in general has evolved from, like, you got coached differently than probably how I got coached, right? And I got coached differently than how I have to coach these kids. So you have to develop and evolve with the times, as well as who you're coaching, and maybe even social things, right? Whatever the case is that you have to do. So, development is probably a pretty basic thing to say. Like I think like, oh, you have to evolve. Well, it's deeper than that. So I think that it's a huge thing that you bring up, that development, because we have to. And you have to, if you want to not only find, like you said, if you want to find success, you have to find good athletes, but you have to evolve to coach those athletes.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
to coach them.
yeah. And I think that's there's coaches do a really good job in development, and there's even just using that term that people think differently about what that even means. But it's just a continuous process of improvement in all the areas. Big picture, you got to recognize what your team needs to succeed on the field, given that the region competition, we're in a very, very tough conference. We just moved from the NAIA to Division II. Now, we were in one of the toughest NAIA conferences in the country the last 2 years. Two of the schools won the national championship. And a lot of those schools have moved over to Division II. NAIA baseball is kind of phasing out a little bit in Southern California, which is a little bit of a sad thing, but that's just the reality where it is right now. But it's the baseball it's intense. It's good top to bottom. Conference that we're in, anybody can beat anybody on any given day. And you're looking at it. It's good, right, from a competitive standpoint. And but every coach is good. Like, I don't look in the conference and be like, oh, this, to me, every coach does a good job. It's like, he's a good dude. He's doing his thing. We might have a different angle on a thing, different schools and that, but it's just I guess you feel like you're coaching in the SEC, just Division two level. Not quite the funding and stuff like that. And so you're trying to recognize what you think your team needs to win. And every sport's a little bit different, what you're doing. And then, like I said, we've been blessed with some really good players that have come in, have been different makers. And, I won't take a ton of credit in saying, oh, I found that guy, but I'll be at least say, hey, I was smart enough to be like, yeah, we want that guy.
You got that guy? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, sometimes you have to just be lucky, right? We want that guy, and sometimes he chooses us. So I like that. And that kind of transitions to the on-field success, right? So, like, how do you build a successful program on the winds of longevity? And I should say, how do you build a successful program on the level of wins? And then how do you sustain that over time? I know you said, like, recruiting guys is a big part of it, right? And development of those guys. Is that kind of the two big pieces of it, is like the right athletes and the development side, or is there another piece of the puzzle that is important to find success when it comes to winning?
And yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Definitely, it's weird when you're a college coach. If you look at the pro level, you're kind of the coach, the manager, and the GM all at the same time. You're doing all those jobs, and so you're doing that with your staff. But you look at pro baseball, and they're trying to put pieces together. It's like, oh, we need starting pitching, we need this, we need more hitting, we need whatever we need. And so, yeah, recruiting goes into that space. You got to have a kind of a clear idea of what you're trying to do from that standpoint. And then where you think you can improve the guys to get better, obviously, from the development standpoint. And then baseball is a funny game. You look at usually the difference between a successful year, wins and losses, is how you do in the close games. When I look back over my career, the years we've been really good, we've won the majority of the close games. When you have really good record in games of 1 to 2 runs. And I'm not sure why, breaks, good guys, whatever. Sometimes good things happen. Last year, we had a little bit of a down year, honestly. Last year in the NAIA, really good conference. In fact, the team out of our conference won the World Series. But that was one of our worst years, and we lost a ton of close games. Like, we couldn't hold on to leads. It's just our record in 1-2 run ball games was poor. And so that's usually, for me, that's a big benchmark of where the team. Once in a while, you'll get a team that's just a juggernaut, and they just crush teams. And it's like, wow, these guys they're loaded, man. They pitch and they got mashers, and they're a super complete team. But those teams are very few and far between. So how you do in those close games, winning the matchups and it's like big moments. Baseball is a game of, it's funny. I don't know if you're a tennis fan at all, but I like men's tennis. In fact, my favorite athlete, if someone were to, they're like, oh, you're a baseball coach, who's your favorite athlete of all time? My favorite athlete of all time is Rafael Nadal. And
Nadal, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I love him
A
because
lefty.
he's a fierce competitor. He's a fierce competitor, but he's also a great sportsman. And how he has this relentless effort to him. But what's cool about him is one of his stats is he's never broke in his entire life. He's never broke a tennis racket out of anger or frustration, just slamming it down, which I think that's an unbelievable stat.
That is a
But
stat.
yeah, I don't think he's got to be the only tennis player that's played that long that's never done that.
Oh,
but
yeah. Easy.
he had that instilled in him as a young athlete, in his family, and that's kind of his character and his makeup. But he possesses those things of balance. Anyway, I got sidetracked talking about tennis, but they talk about break points in tennis.
Yeah.
If you get a break and then you got to sort of consolidate the break, you keep your serve afterwards and keep that going. And that's kind of how baseball is. You get a big inning, you get the edge in the game. Well, you got to hold on to it, do the things, and keep building. Sort of hold serve throughout, and you'll be successful in that. And again, it comes down pitching. Pitching's huge, right? It's no secret in baseball. If you don't have pitching, you're done. You're not going to win. You need good pitchers. The pitcher in baseball and the goalie in hockey are the only two, or I guess soccer too, but the only two individual position guys that get credited with a win or loss in a team sport. That's always something weird to think about, right? It's like, hey, this is a team sport, but we're going to give a win to the goalie or the pitcher. And I tell my pitchers that. I say, hey, man, you guys are the most important guys. I said, don't inflate your ego. Think I'm going to treat you any different, but you're the most important guys on the team. You guys got to do it. So I said, you get a win by your name, man. So
I like that.
So I think just recognizing what makes a successful team on the field, how you got to win games, what your team is that year. Some years you got teams, you got a lot of home run hitters and you can generate that. Other years, whatever recruiting, you're like, man, we're not that good. We're not that powerful. We got to find different ways to score runs and keep it close. And just grit.
It's game management, right? And just understanding who you are as a team and where you can find those runs and where you can kind of get that advantage towards you, whether you have a crazy pitching staff, right? So you're going to have to keep the game close because you don't have the offense, or vice versa. You might have a great offense, but not the greatest pitching staff. So you just have to find a way to generate runs. So I think that, just knowing your team and knowing how to manage the game in those moments, or like you said, close games, right? Finding a way to win sometimes just comes down to it. So I think like you said, understanding as a baseball team or as a program, and maybe just me saying this as a baseball fan, finding a way to win. And I think that's every sport, right? But you have to find a way to win whenever the odds are against you, or like you said, oh man, we just had a great inning, we gave some up, but we're still up by 1 or 2. Can't let them get that momentum back, right? We have to find a way to either score again or pitching come in and shut it down. So absolutely, I love that, and knowing that. So I have 2 questions left for you. One of them is going to be the final kind of deep question, and then I have one fun one, which I already think I know the answer for, but I'm just going to ask it anyways. But my question here to end the deep questions is the name of the show. My favorite question of it all is, why do you coach? What's your coach's why?
Yeah. No, I know that's the title of the show, the why. For me, honestly, I feel it's a calling. That's my biggest why. If you go to the core of it, I believe it's the opportunity that God's given me in this life to combine 2 of my passions, man. It combine the ministry and competition, building men up as that, and get to do it. And I've been blessed because a wise guy said a long time ago, he says, if you love what you do, you never have to work a day in your life. So I'm a lazy bum, man. I haven't been hardly working my entire life.
So I've been working for years.
Doing this stuff. But the deep down, that's why I do it. I care about people. And as I said earlier in the show, I think anybody that wants to contemplate coaching, you need to ask yourself why, and it's got to be people first and then the sport second. Otherwise, you're going to run into a roadblock at some point. And I've coached. I've been on both sides. I've coached some bad teams and some good teams, and been blessed with recent success, and appreciate that. But that's the why. You care about people. You care about the relationships. You want to see them succeed in life, and as a guy told me, say, hey man, a bad day on the baseball field is still a lot better than good days in a lot of other scenarios. So
absolutely,
you keep that in perspective.
Yeah. I mean, doing something that you love is very important, right? So I love that. And for the people, right? You're doing it to help create and be kind of that next step and that middle ground between high school and life, right? Not everybody's going to be able to play at the next level from you. So just being that extra person, that extra step to
And I did coach. I have coached high school before, coached the freshman team 1 year in between jobs when I did teach at high school, which was fun. I enjoyed those guys, but I really like the college age. I think as a coach, or you find an age group that you really connect with or enjoy the most. And I like that formative college where guys are really sort of solidifying sort of who they are and the direction that they're going to go. Trying to find their mission in life and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's a fun age to be at. Plus, it's fun. Like you said, I've been able to coach a few guys that have went on and played professional baseball. One guy made it up to the big league. So that was phenomenal,
Absolutely.
That was always my dream. My dream was to play in the big leagues. I remember sitting in Angel Stadium, watching them hit, and it was a blessing, man. It was so cool.
I said this reference the other day, and it's fun. Yeah, I don't know where it came from, but I like it. Is we have our dreams and our goals, right? As when we were athletes, and obviously you want your kids. Right? I know you mentioned you have kids. You want them to reach their goals and their aspirations and stuff. And we can't live through our kids directly, right? But kind of our goal, I think, as a coach now, which is kind of a maybe subliminal goal, is like it's almost like that secondary, like almost like a pivot point of like, okay, I couldn't make it there, so let me help other kids reach their goals. And then kind of like now it's my goal and my dream is seeing these kids get to a high level or get to pros or whatever like the ultimate outcome might be. So it's almost like a what's the right term? A secondary dream of ours, right? Like we couldn't make our true dream.
Right.
So now our secondary dream now as we're adults is to help kids not only hopefully we find success as a coach because we're still competitive, but also individually find kids get to their dream. So it's almost like a pivot dream, if you would, in a sense.
No, you're right. You're right. You get to live somewhat vicariously through those guys, and it's fun. It's fun. And
I love it.
Cool.
So my final question for you, and just so you guys know, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. If you guys are on YouTube, make sure you guys like, subscribe, all the stuff on YouTube, hit that bell, all that. If you guys are an audio listener, right, PocketCasts, ApplePodcasts, Spotify, whatever, make sure you guys hit those stars, leave a review, say what you got to say, but whatever you say it with your chest because me and Coach want to hear it. Final question for you. I already know the answer to it, but I'm going to ask it anyways for debate for the next baseball coach to come on here. What state produces the best high school baseball?
What state produces the best high school baseball? Well, yeah, obviously I gotta say my hometown state here.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna say that. I was hoping there was some other conversation there, but I already knew you were gonna say Cali, so it's fair.
Yeah, and honestly, I have to, but I'm not just being from where I'm at. I know Texas has some great baseball, and Florida too. I'm just not as familiar, having not spent times in those regions. So I'm sure there's some East Coast guys. You get a Florida guy on there, go, oh, they're way in there. I think there was a study though done on big leaguers where the most big leaguers were from, and I believe it was like a combination of the Bay Area in San Francisco area. I think this might have been 4 or 5 years ago now. I think it was number one, followed by a few others. But Cali definitely on the map. A lot of people out here, a lot of people that can bang the ball around and throw really hard. So.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I lived in Dallas for a little while, and so we had some nationally ranked high school teams, and there was some really good baseball. My kid grew up, and I thought he had a really good. In that year or two he played baseball there, he was really young, but they were so advanced in their baseball at that time. So I will not say my state, but I can understand why you said Cali, because Cali obviously, and like you said earlier, like way early in this podcast, right? places that have really good weather year round, you obviously have more of an advantage in a sense because you can play year round. So I think that plays a big factor into what states might have a little bit more of an advantage for sure in that to answer that question. Well, Coach, I really appreciate you jumping on here and talking baseball with me. It's been a great episode, talking all the things that we got to get to today. So I couldn't be, as I said at the beginning of the show, I couldn't be more thankful that you decided to jump on. So again, thank you, and hopefully, if we were to get you on again, we could talk maybe more behind the scenes stuff, maybe day-to-day stuff about a baseball coach. But yeah, I would love to have you back on. But even if not, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Do a wonderful job. It's a blessing to be a part of this podcast overall. So I wish you best with that for sure.
Of course, man. I appreciate you you being a part of it. So thank you guys so much again for listening. Coach, thanks for jumping on. But with that being said, guys, we'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.